Our gospel lesson this morning is from Luke chapter 20, verses 27 through 38. I invite us to honor the reading of the gospel. As you're able, please stand as we hear these words. Some Sadducees, those who say there is no resurrection, came to Jesus and asked him a question. "Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies, leaving a wife but no children, the man shall marry the widow and raise up children for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers. The first married and died childless. Then the second and the third married her. And so in the same way, all 7 died childless. Finally, the woman also died. In the resurrection, therefore, whose wife will this woman be? For the 7 had married her." Jesus said to them, "Those who belong to this age marry and are given in marriage, but those who are considered worthy of a place in the age and in the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage. Indeed, they cannot die anymore, because they are like angels and are children of God, being children of the resurrection. And the fact that the dead are raised, Moses himself showed in the story about the bush, where he speaks of the Lord as the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Now he is God, not of the dead, but of the living. For to him all of them are alive." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. We're going to be talking a little bit about the life to come. This is how the Jews of Jesus' day and Jews of antiquity and how the early Christians talked about the afterlife. It wasn't simply going to heaven. They talked about the age or the life to come. God's kingdom, God's rule and reign would come upon a renewed heaven and earth. So what I want to do is just to invite you to turn to people around you, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 people around you. And the question is this: if you had one question, what is the one question you have about heaven? However you imagine heaven or the afterlife to be, what is one question that you have always been curious about? All right, so you got 90 seconds and go. Okay, let's come back together. And let's hear, anybody want to share, what's a question you have about heaven? What does God look like? What will we look like? Yeah. Will we recognize each other? All right, any others?
Will our pets be there?
Will what? Will our pets be there? Yeah. Will we know each other? Yeah. What's that? Where is it? Where is heaven? Yeah. Lots of great questions about heaven. We won't have any answers until we get there, and some of these questions we may not have answers to, because heaven will be what God intends for it to be for us. So we're going to be talking about Jesus and his response to a question about the resurrection. There's a story about 4 college students who on the day before a major exam decided to take a road trip to just across the state line to another university where they had friends who were throwing a party at a frat house. And the students, like some college students, they partied a little too hard and a little too long, and they woke up the next day and they realized they were going to miss the exam. And so they decided to come up with they concocted a story that they would tell their professor. They would tell their professor that, yes, they did, in fact, go to this school for the party, but they left early in the evening, but they got a flat tire. And when they went to get the spare was flat as well, and by the time they called the tow truck and got help, it was way too late. They had just gotten onto campus, and they apologized for that. They told this to the professor, and surprisingly, he seemed to be very understanding. And he said to them, you can take the exam, be here tomorrow morning, get some rest, and come in and I'll give you the exam. The next morning, the 4 students showed up to the class. The professor handed them a sheet of paper that had only one question on it, which was, which tire was flat? There's nothing like a good gotcha question. A question that is seemingly unanswerable, or it's a question that is asked for the sole purpose of exposing someone's flaws or to get someone to contradict themselves. In the 20th chapter of Luke, Jesus has been on the receiving end of some gotcha questions from the religious authorities, the Pharisees and the Sadducees. They come to Jesus with questions that could get him into trouble with either the Roman government or could have tarnished his reputation and his popularity with the adoring crowds who have been following him. And this morning's lesson from Luke 20 tells of a group of Sadducees who come to Jesus with a question that seems to be unanswerable. Apparently they were hoping to embarrass Jesus publicly when he finds the question too confounding to even try to answer. And now, this question follows on the heels of a question that was asked by the Pharisees, whether or not we should pay taxes to Caesar. Now, Jesus avoided the trap of the Pharisees' question, and so the Pharisees, they tag in the Sadducees, who come with their question. Now, we know very little about the Sadducees, this Jewish sect, other than they, along with the Pharisees, sought to have control over the Jerusalem temple because they wanted to maintain the temple as a place of holiness. But unlike the Pharisees, who did not seek to have any kind of dealings with Rome, the Sadducees were willing to make some compromises here and there with Rome in order to curry a little bit of political favor, if it allowed them to achieve their goals of religious influence. And while we don't know all of the core beliefs of the Sadducees, the Gospels say that they did not believe in the resurrection. They believed this mainly because they could find no mention of the resurrection in the first 5 books of what we call the Old Testament. So for the Sadducees, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, these were the only books that were authoritative for faith and understanding of God's will. And in these first 5 books of the Old Testament, there is no mention of a resurrection. So for the Sadducees, you were born, you lived, you died, and that was it. That's why they were sad, you see. Now, I'm sorry, you deserve better than that. I know you did not come here for that juvenile, you expect more sophisticated humor, so please forgive that. But the main goal for a male patriarch in those days, for a patriarch, was to leave a legacy. And the way that a patriarch left a legacy was through children. By having children, a man could, in a sense, live on through them, but not in the sense of a resurrection, not in any kind of sense of having a conscious afterlife. A man bore children, and by what he taught his children, he shaped the future. The Sadducees pose a question to Jesus about a woman who ends up being passed down to 7 brothers, all of whom collectively seem to have either bad genes or a congenital heart issue that causes them to drop dead a few weeks after the honeymoon. The Sadducees could have made a point with simply using 2 brothers in this hypothetical question, but they crank up the absurdity by having it be 7 brothers in this scenario. Now, to understand the Levitical law and what the Sadducees are trying to get at, in Deuteronomy 25, Moses declared that if a man married a woman and the man dies without having any children with this woman, then if the man had any brothers, it was the duty of the oldest brother to take this woman as his wife and bear children with her, and that way his brother's legacy could live on. And if that older brother died, then it was the duty of the next older brother in line to take the first brother's widow as his wife. I was reading about one pastor who said that the first scripture passage to make him really upset and really to bring in the tears was Deuteronomy 25, in which it was the duty of the next oldest brother to take on his brother's widow. Because this pastor, when he read that, was about 10 or 12 years old. And he had an older brother who had gotten engaged at that time, and he was considering the possibility that his brother could get married and die, and he was considering the possibility that it would be his duty as the next brother in line to marry his brother's wife, and he would not even have a driver's license at that point. He was very anxious about that. Now, because the Sadducees considered Moses to be the final authority, and since there is no specific reference or mention of a resurrection in the first 5 books of the Old Testament, then the idea of an afterlife would seem silly, given that this poor widow has to belong to one of these 7 men. Jesus takes their question, and his response disarms the question, really kind of dismantles it, by telling them that in the age of the resurrection, marriage will no longer be needed. By declaring marriage to be sort of obsolete in the kingdom, Jesus declares their question to be really irrelevant, because marriage in the kingdom will no longer be necessary. It will be obsolete because marriage in this life was primarily, as their understanding, it was primarily for the purpose of having children so that we can secure a future. But in the kingdom, there is no need for marriage. There is no need for children to be born. Now, the way the Sadducees asked the question tells us something about what they thought about marriage, and more specifically, what they thought about the relations between men and women. Because they asked Jesus, when this woman finally dies, then whose wife will she be in the resurrection? You see, what's really being asked is, who will she belong to? Which man gets to claim her? Or to put it more crassly, who owns her? And Jesus says, those who belong to this age get married or are given in marriage, but those who are worthy of a place in the age to come and in the resurrection of the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage. In other words, Jesus suggests that in the life to come, this woman belongs to no man because she belongs to the age of the resurrection. Like any good rabbi, Jesus alludes to a scripture passage in the Old Testament to support his argument for the resurrection. And like any good rabbi, he chooses a very creative use of the text that on the surface contains no mention of a resurrection. He kind of says to the Sadducees, oh, you want to quote Moses to me? Fine. Here's something that Moses said that I think supports the resurrection. When God revealed himself to Moses at the burning bush, God declared, I am the God of Abraham. I am the God of Isaac and of Jacob. What Jesus suggests is that God was not referring to Israel's founding fathers in the past tense. God did not say, I was the God of Abraham, but he's dead and gone. Or I was the God of Isaac and Jacob, but they're dead and gone. No, Jesus says that God speaks of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, these great patriarchs, in the present tense, as if this is an ongoing relationship, as if death has not severed their relationship to God. Now, we didn't read the next 2 verses after this, but this section ends with some of the religious leaders commending Jesus for his answer, and then Luke says a very telling verse, and nobody dared to ask him any more questions. When it comes to the age of the resurrection, the life to come, heaven, however we want to refer to it, what it will be like, what it will feel like, we only have a reference from this world. And so we ask questions from categories that are from this world and this life as we understand it. So, for example, we ask, when a person dies in heaven or in the afterlife, in the world to come, are they forever the age at which they died? Or we may ask, what if a person goes through some dramatic brain injury, and it significantly changes their personality in this life. But they continue to live a thriving life. So when that person dies and they go into the resurrection age, does their personality revert back to their original personality, or does it keep going on with the way that it was when they died? Maybe you don't ask yourselves your questions, but I do at 3 a.m. in the morning. And like any good rabbi or teacher, Jesus might say to us, those are very good questions, very interesting questions, but you're trying to understand the resurrection by comparing them to the way that you experience this world or the way in which you have arranged this world. You're trying to understand this question from this worldly perspective, how things are set up in this world, where people are sometimes treated as commodities and property. Or maybe you've figured out how to work the systems of this world to your advantage. But in the world to come, Jesus says, things are going to be different. Imagine this woman in this hypothetical question from the Pharisees. Imagine this woman, how she would feel as she wakes up in the resurrection age. And she realizes that her life is no longer defined by a man, and her life is no longer defined by her reproduction qualities. Her life is simply defined by the new age. What Jesus describes is a realm in which nobody belongs to anyone else, no one owns anyone else, for we all belong to God. It's no wonder that many people who were drawn to Jesus were the ones who were victims of a corrupt system that often exploited them in their lives. For a rabbi to look at a hungry crowd and to look at the widowed and the outcast and to declare them to be beloved children of God, for a rabbi, for Jesus to tell the meek that they will inherit the earth, and he declared the poor to be blessed, to tell those who were always coming in last place that they can go to the front of the line, to paint a vision of the world to come like this, it sounded like crazy talk. It was like he was talking about a whole new world. And indeed he was. And I wonder if we are prone, we in the modern church, we are prone to forgetting this vision, the promise of a new world. If you ask people, why do you come to church? You may get a variety of answers, but they all seem to be about the same thing. They usually run along the same lines as, I come to church to get a spiritual lift. You know, the week's kind of been hard on me, and so I come to church to get lifted up. Or I come to church to deal with the stress of being a parent, or to deal with the stress from my job. Or I come to church to learn how to be a better spouse or a better parent. All of which are good and helpful things, but I wonder if we're maybe missing the bigger picture. What if the point of our gathering each and every Sunday is to remind ourselves that this world and all the systems that run it and all the ways in which we manipulate things to our advantage and all the stuff that we're banking on and building our lives on, this world is crumbling and fading away, and a new world will arrive. What if we were to put that into a kind of mission statement? Every church has a mission statement. We have ours on the bulletin, like a lot of churches do. Usually a church's mission statement is, our mission is to make disciples. Our mission is to love God and love neighbor. Our mission is to be the hands and feet of Jesus in our community, all of which are good things. But what if, in light of our lesson today from Luke 20, what if our mission statement was, our mission is to be a sign to the people of Alamance County that the way things are will one day come to an end when God's kingdom arrives. Bishop Will Willimon remembers his first year in ministry as a pastor of a local church. During that first year, he got invited by the pastor of an AME Zion church across town to come and preach at his church. And so Willimon called him the night before and just said, just want to remind you, what time does your service begin? And the pastor said, We start around 11. Williman arrived about 20 minutes before 11, and he was the only one in the parking lot. At 10:55, the pastor pulled up. Around 11:10, the choir began gathering, putting on their robes. They began rehearsing the music. Finally, the congregation began to slowly file in, and finally the service got into full swing. And Williman said it was 5 long, drawn-out congregational songs and 2 choir anthems later that he finally stood up to preach at 12:30. And he preached a very, very safe, efficient, 15-minute bland Methodist sermon that the congregation quietly endured for about 15 minutes. And then he sat down, and the pastor of the church got up and looked at him and said, Is that it? You're done? Okay. And then he said, let me just add a few more thoughts to what Brother Williman has brought to us this morning. And then the pastor preached for another 15 or 20 minutes. After the service, Williman was talking with the pastor, and he said, look, this is a whole new experience for me. I'm just curious. Why on earth does it take your congregation so long to worship? All the singing and the setup. Why does it take, almost 90 minutes before you even get to the word? Why does your congregation just worship so long? And the old African-American pastor said, son, you need to understand that in this community, the unemployment rate is 21%. And for the people who do have a job, it's usually not enough to pay the bills. The lucky ones are the ones who are working 2 jobs. When my people leave this place and go back into the world, all week long the world tells them how useless they are, how worthless they are, because they don't have the finest clothes, they don't drive the nicest cars. All week long they get all this stuff in their head from the world. So when they come to church, they need to be reminded that they are royalty. And in order for that to happen, it takes a while to get their head straight about who they are and to remind them that this world will fade away and a new world is coming. And the old pastor smiled and he leaned in and he said to Williman, tell me, how long does it take for your people to get their heads straight about who they are and about the world that's coming? And Williman thought of that verse in Luke, and no one dared to ask him any more questions. Thanks be to God. Amen.